The HOA fined my pregnant wife for parking too long. But if they'd just checked why she couldn't move the car, they would have known. She was in labor, fighting for her life. Comment where you're watching from. The morning sun had barely risen when Ethan Miller backed his old silver SUV into their driveway, the engine sputtering like an old friend trying to hang on. His wife, Grace, was sitting in the passenger seat, both hands gently resting on her swollen belly. At 37 weeks pregnant, every movement was a small battle, every step, a reminder that life was about to change forever. They had moved into Maple Creek Estates just 2 months ago, a quiet, manicured neighborhood tucked behind a row of maple trees, where lawns looked like green carpets and mailboxes matched the color of the fences. It seemed peaceful at first. But behind that perfection, something darker waited. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, ran this place like a dictatorship disguised as community care. Rules upon rules. Grass no taller than 2 inches. Trash bins hidden by 8 a.m. sharp. Cars parked facing the same direction. And the worst of all, no vehicle shall remain stationary in common or visible driveways for more than 8 hours. Grace didn't think much of it at first. But Ethan, being the cautious husband, read every letter that came in their mailbox. He could tell right away that Maple Creek wasn't just about neat lawns, it was about control. Still, he had no choice. The rent was affordable, and the house was close to the hospital. Grace's pregnancy had been delicate from the start, with occasional bleeding, shortness of breath, and swelling that sometimes made her cry in silence. "Ethan," she said softly one afternoon as she leaned back on the couch, "promise me when the baby comes we'll leave this place." He kissed her forehead. "First, let's bring our little girl home safe. Then we'll go anywhere you want." The first warning, it started small. One morning, Ethan found a yellow slip tucked under his windshield wiper. Notice of violation. HOA regulation. 4.2a. Unauthorized overnight parking. Fine. 75, he stared at it, confused. His car had been parked in his own driveway. He called the HOA office immediately. "Good morning? Maple Creek Association. This is Janet speaking," a chipper voice answered. "Yeah. Hi. This is Ethan Miller, house number 23. I just got a parking violation. But the car's in my own driveway." "Yes. Mr. Miller?" Janet interrupted politely. "According to our regulations, vehicles must not remain stationary for more than 8 hours. The purpose is to maintain neighborhood consistency and safety." "Safety?" Ethan repeated, baffled. "It's my car on my driveway. I understand, sir. But it's visible from the street. The rule applies to all residents equally." He hung up in disbelief. When he told Grace, she laughed softly. "So they're fining people for not driving enough?" "Apparently." Ethan tried to shrug it off. "Don't worry, I'll keep moving it around." He did. Every morning before work, he'd back the SUV out, circle the cul-de-sac, and pull back in. It was ridiculous, but he wanted no trouble. Grace had enough to worry about already. The second fine a week later, another letter arrived. This time, red-stamped. "Second notice. Repeated parking violation. Fine. $150 failure to comply may result in towing or further legal action." Ethan's jaw clenched. He checked the driveway cameras. He had moved the car. Twice. That evening, as he was taking out the trash, he spotted Karen, the HOA president, walking her little white dog down the street. Her hair was tightly permed, her lips pursed like she'd sucked on a lemon. "Evening," Ethan called out, trying to stay polite. Karen stopped and gave him the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile. "Evening, Mr. Miller. I hope you're adjusting well. Lovely neighborhood, isn't it?" "It was until I started getting fined for parking in my own driveway." She tilted her head. "Oh, those aren't fines, dear. They're reminders of the standards we all agreed to when we joined the community." "Standards?" Ethan said, trying not to lose it. "My wife's 8 months pregnant. She can barely walk. The car's parked there because she needs it close in case we need to rush to the hospital." Karen gave a small laugh. "Well, perhaps next time park it inside the garage." "It's full," Ethan said. "We're using it to store baby stuff." Karen's smile vanished. "Then maybe you should have planned better. The rules are there for a reason." And with that she turned, her dog's leash snapping tight as she walked away. Ethan stood there, fists clenched, watching her disappear into the shadows of perfect lawns and mailboxes, each one hiding behind the same false sense of community. 2 days later, Grace woke up pale and trembling. She felt sharp cramps far earlier than expected. Ethan rushed her to the hospital, his mind spinning the whole way. "Just a little dehydration," the doctor said after hours of tests. "But she needs bed rest." "Absolutely no stress," Ethan nodded. "Got it. No stress." When they came home that evening, Grace could barely climb the porch steps. He helped her inside, tucked her into bed, and promised to handle everything. The next morning, he woke up to another envelope stuck to the door. "Final notice. Immediate action required. Third violation. Fine. $300 failure to comply may result in towing or legal penalty." He ripped the paper in half and threw it on the counter. His hands shook with rage. Grace looked up from the couch, her voice weak. "Ethan, please don't fight with them. Just don't." He nodded, but inside he knew something had to change. A quiet desperation. Over the next week, Ethan tried everything. He called the HOA board. He emailed photos showing he'd moved the car daily. He even offered to attend a meeting to explain. No one listened. "All residents are subject to the same rules. Exceptions cannot be made." Grace grew quieter each day. Her feet swelled, her back hurt constantly, and she barely slept. The baby was due in less than 3 weeks. One evening, Ethan found her sitting in the car, tears running down her face. Hey, what's wrong?" he asked, kneeling beside her. "I just wanted to sit outside for a while." "But I saw her," Grace whispered, staring down the street. "Karen, she was taking pictures of our driveway again." Ethan turned. Sure enough, a flash glimmered from behind a bush. That was it. He stormed down the driveway, yelling, "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Karen flinched, hiding her phone. "Oh, calm down, Mr. Miller. I'm just documenting for the board." "Documenting what?" "My wife sitting in her car?" "If your wife is able to sit in the car," Karen said coldly, "she's able to move it." Grace gasped from behind him. "Karen, please. I'm 37 weeks pregnant." "I can barely stand." Karen adjusted her sunglasses, unfazed. "Then maybe you should have followed the guidelines before it came to this." Ethan's voice cracked. "You're harassing her. You're pushing her when she's not well." Karen smirked. "If you can't handle the standards, perhaps Maple Creek isn't the right fit for your family." She walked away before Ethan could say another word. He turned back to Grace, who sat trembling in the car seat, whispering, "Maybe she's right. Maybe we don't belong here." He pulled her into his arms. "Don't you ever say that again." "We belong anywhere we choose to." But as he looked up at the streetlight reflecting off Karen's perfect white car, he felt something deep in his chest, a mix of fear and fury that wouldn't go away. The calm. Before the storm, for a few days, things seemed quiet. No new letters. No knocks on the door. Ethan thought maybe, just maybe, they were being left alone. But that peace wouldn't last. Because on the morning of June 18th, Grace woke up with a strange pain. Not the small cramps she'd been having before. This one made her gasp. "Ethan," she said weakly, clutching her stomach. He jumped up, rushing to her side. "What's wrong?" I think my water just broke." He froze. For a second, time stopped. Then chaos. Ethan grabbed the hospital bag, keys, and helped her into the car, the same SUV the HOA hated so much. As he backed out of the driveway, he noticed something taped to the mailbox. Another bright yellow slip. Immediate violation. Vehicle parked over 12 hours. Fine. $500. He tore it off, crushed it in his hand, and whispered under his breath, "You've got to be kidding me." But there was no time to think. Grace was crying in pain beside him. He sped down the street, past Karen's pristine white fence, past the perfect lawns and matching mailboxes, not caring anymore who was watching. Behind him, the yellow slip fluttered in the wind, the last warning before everything would change forever. The sound of Grace's breathing filled the car as Ethan sped down Maple Creek Boulevard. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the dashboard, her face pale with pain. The hospital was only 15 minutes away. But those 15 minutes felt like a lifetime. Every bump in the road made her wince. Every red light felt like betrayal. "Breathe, baby, breathe," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "You're doing amazing." Grace nodded weakly, tears sliding down her cheeks. I can't believe this is happening now. Just hold on, okay? "We're almost there." He didn't realize until later how fast he'd been driving, until flashing blue lights filled the rearview mirror. Ethan's stomach dropped. A police car. He slowed down, pulling over. The officer stepped out. Tall, middle-aged, polite, but firm. "Sir, license and registration." "Officer, please," Ethan said breathlessly. "My wife, she's in labor." The officer leaned down, glancing at Grace, who was moaning softly in pain. His expression changed instantly. Okay, follow me. I'll escort you to the hospital." And just like that, the officer's car took the lead, sirens cutting through the early morning quiet. When they reached St. Matthew's Medical Center, nurses rushed out with a wheelchair. Grace was crying now, one hand pressed over her stomach, the other reaching for Ethan's. "I'll be right there," he promised, parking the car near the emergency entrance. He didn't care anymore if the HOA called it unauthorized parking. He didn't care about the fines, the warnings, or the rules. Because in that moment, the only rule that mattered was saving his family. Hours of waiting. The sterile white of the hospital room blurred as Ethan paced the hallway. His phone buzzed with notifications, but he ignored them all. A nurse finally emerged, her face calm but serious. "Mr. Miller?" He rushed over. "Is she okay?" "Is the baby—" "She's stable," the nurse said. But the baby's heart rate dropped for a bit. "She's being monitored closely." Ethan exhaled shakily, tears forming in his eyes. "Can I see her?" The nurse nodded. When he entered, Grace was lying on the hospital bed, weak but conscious. Her eyes met his, soft and frightened. "Ethan, I'm scared." He took her hand. "Don't be. You're the strongest woman I've ever met," she smiled faintly. "Do you think the HOA will fine us for leaving the car there?" He laughed, but there was pain behind it. "Let them try." The unthinkable. Email 2 days later, while Grace and the baby rested, Ethan finally checked his phone. There it was, an email from the Maple Creek HOA Enforcement Committee. Subject: urgent, violation, escalation, and tow notice. Dear Mr. Miller, your vehicle remains in violation of HOA Regulation 4.2a. Despite previous notices, no corrective action has been taken. Your account now reflects $1,275 in fines. The vehicle has been towed effective immediately. Failure to remit payment within 7 days will result in further legal measures. Ethan froze. His car, the same one they had driven to the hospital, towed. He called immediately. Janet from the HOA answered again, her tone rehearsed. "Janet, it's Ethan Miller. You towed my car from a hospital emergency zone. My wife was giving birth." Janet paused, clearly caught off guard. "Mr. Miller, our enforcement team simply followed procedure. If the vehicle remained over the time limit—" "Over the time limit?" he shouted. "She was in labor. She could have died." "I understand your frustration, sir," she said, voice cold. "But we can't make exceptions. The rules apply equally to everyone." Ethan's hands shook. "You people don't apply rules equally. You use them like weapons." And he hung up. That night, as Grace held their newborn daughter, Ethan promised silently to himself they would pay for what they'd done. 3 days later, Grace was discharged. She looked frail but glowing, holding baby Lily in her arms. When they drove into Maple Creek in a borrowed car, Ethan felt every eye on them. Curtains shifted. Neighbors pretended to wave but whispered behind glass, and then he saw it, a bright red notice taped to their front door. Notice of legal escalation, failure to comply with HOA regulations. Total due, $1,275 plus towing fees. Immediate payment required. Grace's voice cracked as she read it. "Ethan, we can't afford this." He tore the paper off and crushed it. "We're not paying a dime." But that night, when he opened his email again, there was something worse waiting. a message from Karen, personally addressed. From Karen H., HOA President. Subject, Community Standards Reminder. Mr. Miller, while we sympathize with your recent personal situation, your ongoing disregard for HOA rules sets a poor example for the neighborhood. Your vehicle's removal was justified under Article 4.2a. We recommend prompt resolution to avoid property lien procedures. Respectfully, Karen H. Ethan stared at the email until his vision blurred. His wife was barely walking. His daughter was barely breathing without assistance. And Karen was still talking about rules. That evening, Ethan sat in the nursery. The soft hum of the baby monitor filled the silence. Grace was asleep in the next room. He scrolled through his phone, through the photos of Grace crying in pain, the time-stamped video of the hospital, the flashing sirens, and an idea began to form. He wasn't going to fight them quietly anymore. He was going to show the world what kind of monsters they really were. He created a short video titled, HOA Find My Pregnant Wife While She Was in Labor. He uploaded it to Facebook, then TikTok, then YouTube. The video began with Grace's tearful face in the hospital car, then the fine taped to their mailbox, then the tow notice. He added a voiceover, his own voice, trembling but clear. We followed every rule. We kept our home clean, our yard trimmed, our bills paid. But when my wife's water broke, she couldn't move the car. The HOA didn't care. They fined her while she was in labor. He hit post and went to bed. The next morning by sunrise, his phone was vibrating nonstop, thousands of comments, hundreds of thousands of views. People were furious, outraged, protective. Messages poured in from strangers across the country. This is beyond cruel. That HOA president should be ashamed. File a lawsuit and go public. Ethan couldn't believe it. The story had gone viral overnight. Even local news channels started calling. And that afternoon, when he looked outside, Karen was standing by her mailbox. Phone in hand, her face pale as a ghost. That evening, Ethan stepped outside, phone recording. Karen walked toward him, trembling, trying to maintain her composure. Mr. Miller, she said, forcing a smile, we need to talk. Oh, now you want to talk? He said bitterly. She adjusted her sunglasses even though it was nearly dark. The HOA board has received unwanted attention. It would be best if you removed that video. Unwanted attention. Ethan snapped. You fined my wife while she was in labor. You had our car towed from a hospital. You did this, Karen's voice wavered. We didn't know. You never cared to know. For the first time, her facade cracked. Look, we're just trying to protect property values. If people think this neighborhood allows special treatment, Ethan laughed, a hollow, broken laugh. You're worried about property values while my wife nearly died giving birth? Neighbors had started gathering on their lawns, phones recording. Karen looked around, realizing her power was slipping away. Remove the video, she hissed under her breath, or you'll regret it. Ethan took a step closer, his voice cold. You already made sure I did. He walked away, leaving her standing there, surrounded by neighbors who no longer looked at her with respect, but disgust. By the end of the week, the story was everywhere. News reporters camped near the gate of Maple Creek. HOA members resigned quietly, one after another. And then came the letter. Not from the HOA this time, but from the State Housing Commission. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Miller, an investigation has been opened into potential harassment and discriminatory enforcement by the Maple Creek Homeowners Association. Grace cried when she read it. Not because of revenge, but because for the first time, someone finally listened. As Ethan sat on the porch that night, holding baby Lily, he looked at the quiet houses around him. The same lawns, the same fences, but they didn't look perfect anymore. They looked like what they really were, a cage pretending to be a community. And for the first time since they'd moved in, Ethan smiled, because now the truth was out. The sun was rising over Maple Creek Estates, but it no longer looked like the same picture-perfect neighborhood. The air felt heavier. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was guilty. In just a few days, everything had changed. Ethan and Grace's story had exploded across every social media platform, racking up millions of views. National news outlets picked it up. Reporters stood outside the gated community, interviewing neighbors who whispered about the pregnant woman the HOA fined during labor. Everywhere, the name Karen Howard, HOA president, became a symbol of everything wrong with power and privilege. Ethan didn't have to say much anymore. The world was speaking for him. 3 days after the video went viral, Ethan opened the door to find a small crowd outside his house. Neighbors, people who had never even said hi before, stood there awkwardly holding small gifts and cards. A woman from 2 streets over, Martha Collins, stepped forward. Her voice trembled. "Mr. Miller, I just wanted to say I'm so sorry for what happened. Karen's been bullying people here for years." But no one ever had the courage to speak up. Ethan nodded. Unsure what to say, another neighbor added, "She fined me once for leaving a kid's bicycle outside overnight, a toy. We just paid it to avoid trouble." Soon, stories poured out. Absurd fines, threats of liens, late-night photos being taken by the HOA patrol. Grace came out onto the porch, holding baby Lily in her arms. Her face was pale, but her eyes were stronger than ever. "Thank you," she said softly. "It means a lot that you're here," Martha smiled faintly. "You're the reason people aren't afraid anymore." For a brief moment, Maple Creek actually felt like a community, but that peace shattered. An hour later, when 2 black SUVs rolled up to the HOA clubhouse at the end of the street. The State Housing Commission had arrived. The investigation begins within hours. Agents and legal representatives were combing through the HOA office. Boxes of paperwork, emails, and photographs were carried out. Rumors spread fast that Karen and her board had been caught using surveillance cameras illegally, that they'd selectively enforced fines on certain families, and that they'd even forged timestamps to justify penalties. Ethan and Grace were asked to come down to give a formal statement. Grace sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. She still moved slowly, her recovery ongoing, but she refused to be left out. The investigator, a calm woman named Agent Rowe, smiled warmly. "I just want you both to know your story opened this case. What you went through wasn't just cruel, it was unlawful." Grace blinked back tears. "We didn't want revenge. We just wanted peace. And you'll have it," Rowe said. "But people like her, they don't get to use rules as weapons anymore." That evening, as the agents left the neighborhood, a scene unfolded that no one expected. Karen Howard stood on her front lawn, surrounded by reporters. Her usually perfect hair was unkempt, her sunglasses missing, her face pale. "Mrs. Howard," one reporter shouted, "is it true you fined a pregnant woman while she was in labor?" Karen held up a trembling hand. "This is all being exaggerated. The HOA was just enforcing the bylaws." Another reporter cut her off. "Did you take photos of residents' driveways without permission?" "No comment." Her voice cracked as camera flashes lit her up like fireworks. From across the street, Ethan watched quietly. He didn't smile. He didn't feel victorious. He just felt done. Grace came to stand beside him. "She looks broken." Ethan nodded. "So did you that day. Difference is, you didn't deserve it." The hearing 2 weeks later, the State Commission summoned the Maple Creek HOA board to a formal hearing. Ethan and Grace were asked to testify. The courtroom wasn't grand, just a small administrative chamber. But to them, it felt like justice breathing again. Karen sat across the room, flanked by her attorney, her face stone cold, but eyes full of fear. Ethan stood at the witness stand, voice steady. "My wife was 37 weeks pregnant," he said. "She was in labor when you fined her. You towed our car from the hospital, and you did it because you could." Karen's lawyer tried to interrupt. "Objection! Emotional speculation." The judge silenced him. "Overruled." "Continue, Mr. Miller." Ethan leaned forward. "This isn't about a parking fine. It's about what happens when people in power forget empathy, when they treat rules like walls instead of protection." The courtroom was silent. Grace took the stand next, her voice softer but even more piercing. "I thought we'd done something wrong," she said. I thought maybe we didn't belong here because we weren't perfect enough. But then I realized the only thing we did wrong was trust that our community would care. The judge nodded gravely. Thank you, Mrs. Miller. By the end of the hearing, Karen's hands were trembling. The verdict was delivered 2 weeks later. The Maple Creek HOA board was dissolved. Karen Howard was permanently barred from holding any community office. The Millers were compensated for damages, legal fees, and emotional distress. The headline the next day read, HOA President Found Guilty of Harassment. Couple's viral story triggers nationwide reform. A new beginning months passed. The house that once felt like a prison now felt like home again. The new HOA committee, made up of decent, kind neighbors, sent a handwritten note to the Millers. We can't undo what happened, but we can promise it'll never happen again. Ethan built a small garden in front of the house. He planted roses, Grace's favorite, where the yellow vines used to be taped. Sometimes, when he watered them in the mornings, he'd catch glimpses of other neighbors smiling, waving, or stopping by with coffee. The same people who once stayed silent now looked at him with gratitude. Grace often sat on the porch with baby Lily, watching the sunlight hit the rose petals. Do you think she'll remember any of this? She asked one day. Ethan smiled. Maybe not the pain, but she'll grow up in a world where her parents stood up for what's right. Grace looked down at their daughter's tiny face. That's enough. The letter one afternoon, months later, Ethan checked the mailbox and found a letter with no return address. Inside was a single page. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I let the rules blind me. I forgot they were supposed to protect people, not hurt them. I don't expect forgiveness. But I wanted you to know that losing everything made me realize what I'd become. Karen H. Grace read it quietly, then folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer. She finally understands, she whispered. Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, but I hope she learns to be kind before someone else suffers. 1 year later, the next spring, the roses in their yard bloomed brighter than ever. Lily was learning to walk now, tiny steps on the same driveway where Grace once cried in pain. Ethan couldn't help but feel a bittersweet twist every time she stumbled and laughed. The HOA reforms inspired by their story spread across the state. New laws that limited HOA power, ensured transparency, and required emergency exemptions for families in distress. Ethan was even invited to speak at a housing conference. Standing at the podium, he said, "We don't need fewer rules. We need more humanity. Rules without compassion are just cages, and compassion without rules is chaos. But if we balance both, that's when a community becomes real." The room erupted in applause, and in that moment Ethan realized their pain hadn't been for nothing. It had built something bigger. That night, back home, he sat on the porch again. The air was warm, filled with the soft chirping of crickets. Grace came out, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. Lily giggled in her arms, clutching a tiny rose petal. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. Ethan looked around, at the quiet street, at the neighbors laughing in the distance, at the roses swaying gently in the breeze. "Not anymore," he said. "Because now, this feels like home." Grace smiled. "The same home that once broke us." He nodded. "And the same one we rebuilt." She rested her head on his shoulder. "You know what's funny? That car they towed, the one they hated so much? What about it? It's sitting in our garage now. I can't bring myself to sell it." Ethan laughed softly. "Good. It's part of the story. Proof that sometimes the ugliest moments grow the strongest roots." Grace kissed him gently. "Then let's never forget." The camera of life slowly pulled back, showing the quiet street, the blooming roses, the faint laughter from nearby homes, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, a single line lingered in the air like a whisper of truth. They fined us for standing still. But standing still was what saved everything.